Hi, everyone. I'm Mr. Irvin, and today I'm going to talk about a famous event in the 1960s known as Woodstock. It is important to note that not all protests are political, and that cultural movements can have a powerful impact on the United States as well. So perhaps no event demonstrates that better than Woodstock, which was a large music festival that took place in Bethel, New York in 1969. Now, Woodstock was the culmination of a larger cultural movement that was taking place in the 1960s known as the counterculture. So, in order to understand Woodstock and the counterculture, we need to backtrack a little bit to the 1950s so that we can understand what mainstream culture in America looked like at that time period. So, in the years following World War II, the United States had gone through a period of significant economic growth. Many Americans coming back from the war used the GI Bill to go to college and earn degrees that would land them better jobs. Other Americans used the GI Bill to buy a home for the first time. As a result, there was a massive migration of Americans to the suburbs. For many returning veterans of World War II, it was cheaper to buy a suburban house as opposed to rent an apartment in the city. These suburban houses were ideal for starting a family, and the move to the suburbs was accompanied by a baby boom, which was a huge explosion in the birth rates within the United States. Between 1945 and 1950, 50 million babies were born in the United States. So, the culture that emerged in the suburbs of America was one that was both conservative and also driven by consumerism. In the 1950s, televisions became affordable for the average American. This ushered in the golden age of television, which was marked by TV shows like The Honeymooners and I Love Lucy. However, it also proved to be a golden age of advertising as well, with companies being able to market their products through TV commercials. The increase in advertising, coupled with the economic prosperity of many Americans, led to a new consumer culture within the United States. Across the country, many Americans rushed to buy the latest products to fill their new suburban homes. However, this new consumer culture also encouraged conformity. The houses being built in Levittowns across the nation were all the same. Americans were tuning into the same three channels, watching the same three shows, and being indoctrinated into the same middle class idea of the American dream. The 1950s proved to create stability, yes, but it also led to restlessness, which was especially evident in America's youth. So the boomer generation, or the generation born after World War II, grew up believing that they could change the world for the better. However, the 1960s, which was the decade that generation came of age, proved to be one of the most turbulent times in American history. It was the era of the civil rights movement, the growth of feminism, and it was also a time of political turmoil created by the controversial war in Vietnam. Many young Americans became disillusioned by the continued racism, sexism, and support for warfare that existed within American society. These young Americans began to question traditional American values and the institutions that supported them, such as churches, schools, and parents. The youth of the 1960s increasingly looked at authority figures with suspicion and mistrust. A popular slogan, for example, in the 1960s stated, "Trust no one over 30." So, skepticism of authority created a cultural divide between younger Americans and the older generations. Many young Americans became part of the growing counterculture movement of the 1960s. The counterculture rebelled against mainstream society by challenging traditional styles of dress, music, living conditions, and views on sex and drugs, which had long been established in the 1950s and even before that. So these hippies, or flower children, as they were sometimes called, rejected their parents' clean-cut look and instead donned long hair, beards, beads, and jeans. Outraged by the Vietnam War, many middle-class children participated in organized protests on college campuses. Others turned to mind-bending drugs, which included LSD. The soundtrack of the counterculture was rock and roll and included bands such as the Beatles, Rolling Stones, and Janis Joplin. Folk music, with its protest lyrics, was also popular, and the music of Joan Baez and Bob Dylan gave voice to the counterculture movement. Even views on sexual expression were changing. The counterculture coincided with the sexual revolution in America, which changed attitudes about premarital sex and helped usher in the beginnings of the gay rights movement. So the highlight of this cultural revolution was Woodstock in 1969, which was billed as 3 days of peace and music. Woodstock was the brainchild of four men who were looking for an investment opportunity: John Roberts, Joel Rossaman, Artie Cornfield, and Michael Lang created Woodstock Ventures Inc. for the purposes of hosting a music festival and turning a profit. What started as an attempt to make money off of popular music, however, quickly morphed into the most iconic moment in the history of the counterculture. So, as they're trying to prepare to create this rock festival, there were problems organizing it from the very, very beginning. The original location of the festival had to be changed when both the towns of Woodstock and Wallkill in New York denied Woodstock Ventures the permits they needed to stage it. Scrambling to find a new venue, the concert organizers started to look for alternative places to hold this. And what they finally ended up settling on was a dairy farm, which was owned by a man named Max Yasgur. And he rented it to them only about a month before the festival was actually supposed to be set to begin. The group had actually very little time then to build the stage, the concession stands, the bathroom facilities, fences, and gates that they would need to actually make the event run. When people began to arrive for the festival a few days early, the fencing and the gates had not actually yet been constructed. As a result, the concert became a free event. Because of the lack of security and the inability of the concert organizers to charge admission, the whole thing became a free concert that became part of the larger counterculture movement at that time. So Woodstock Ventures, who were actually organizing the event, had only expected 50,000 people to attend. But 2 days before the concert was set to begin, there were already over 50,000 people camped out on Yasgur's farm, with many more expected to arrive. Overall, the concert is estimated to have drawn about 500,000 people to Bethel, New York. There were so many people that traveled to the Woodstock Festival that local highways and roads were at a complete standstill. And many people actually abandoned their cars on the road itself and actually walked to the festival on foot in order to see the bands perform. So Woodstock was headlined by some of the biggest musical acts in the world at the time. The first group that signed on to play at Woodstock was Creedence Clearwater Revival. And then they were joined by other acts, including Santana, the Grateful Dead, The Who, and Janis Joplin, just to name a few. The festival started around 5 p.m. on August 15th, and it didn't end until Jimi Hendrix left the stage early in the morning on August 18th. For many people, Woodstock was so much more than a rock concert. The 1960s had created an enormous amount of division within American society, especially between the older and younger generations. Many older Americans had come to look at America's youth with not only mistrust, but also disdain. For conservative Americans, the counterculture represented the end of modern civilization as they knew it. Mainstream Americans were becoming increasingly alarmed by extremists within the counterculture who were willing to use violence to protest against Vietnam or other issues. And many Americans were turned off by the support of socialism by some of counterculture's members. Yet, for the supporters of the counterculture, Woodstock represented the best qualities of the movement. For 3 days, 500,000 people had gathered on a farm to listen to music. The event had been peaceful and demonstrated unity among the baby boomer generation, who had come together in opposition to war, racism, and poverty. As the hippies and flower children of Woodstock grew older and had children of their own, many of their causes were left unfinished. In the 1970s, the counterculture generation became more concerned about finding jobs of their own and settling down. However, the cultural revolution that they created still shapes our values as Americans today. Their fashion, music, emphasis on individuality, and social consciousness are still very important parts of our current society. And the counterculture gave birth to entirely new movements, including the modern feminist movement and the LGBTQ movement. So this is a protest that is incredibly worth knowing even to this day. Take care.